Welcome to part 2 of the Maniac Companion podcast presented by The Disorderly. Head over to thedisorderly.com for the best in sports and entertainment. Disorderly Media on Twitter, Disorderly ENT on Facebook. My name is Nick Rizner. You can find me on Twitter at Nick Rizner, NickRizner. Give us a follow, spread the word about this, the show, the website. It's much, much appreciated. So, first, some quick news and notes. This thing ended up being a lot more complicated than even I was anticipating. This is also, as I mentioned, our first ever dive into one of these binge series, right? So on Netflix or Amazon Prime or Hulu, they drop all these things all at once. So you have the entire season in front of you immediately, as opposed to the HBO shows and shows like that we've been doing that obviously comes out once a week. It's easier to sort of pace it out. Right after the episode ends, I'll do a companion reaction podcast, and then next week I'll do another. So with Netflix, what do, right? Do we release 10 different episodes for a 10-episode season? Do we do it in chunks? At the beginning, my choice, I guess, was to do multiple parts, 3 to be exact. So part 1 would be episode 1 through 3, part 2 would be episode 4 through 6, and then part 3 would be episode 7 through 10 to finish it out. It's complicated. This is a complicated show. There's a lot going on. I thought that was maybe a little too ambitious. Also, just as doing a quick informal survey, talking to my friends, people are taking their time with this show. They're not really flying through it. So I don't think there's a big rush to churn out these companion episodes. Hopefully, this gives people more access or whatever. So anyway, long story short, instead of doing these 3-episode chunks, part 1 obviously is already out. That's episode 1 through 3. Part 2 that you're listening to right now, that's going to be episode 4 and 5, just episode 4 and 5. I won't talk about anything beyond that. The rest of the episodes, so 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and then 10, and sort of a recap of the entire season will all be future parts. So hopefully that makes sense to everybody. Picking up where we left off, Emma Stone and Jonah Hill, a.k.a. Annie and Owen, we're just getting into the shared dream, right? So they finished the A pill part of the experiment. They took the B pill. They dive into the shared dream. They wake up in the 80s. That's where episode 3 ends. So episode 4, obviously, we're diving right into this reality. What a weird dream it was, by the way. Annie and Owen, they're in 1980s Long Island. They're both rocking awful 80s haircuts, and they're on this huge, crazy mission involving a stolen lemur. So yeah, I mean, it's weird. I told you it was weird. I love this reality, by the way. I wanted to stay in it longer. I couldn't get enough of this stuff with Emma Stone's Long Island accent. Jonah Hill was dropping lines like, when she's talking about the original theft of the lemur, he's just like shaking his head in disbelief, and he's like, that is fudging disrespectful while you're peeing in the bagel, boss. It was great. I loved everything about this dream. And the first thing that you notice right away is how they're sort of bringing in things from the real world. So you've got Emma Stone reading from the book that she packed in her suitcase. That was from episode 1. In the real world, she packs this book. All of a sudden, it's in the dream. You also have the fish and wildlife officer, who is the same guy that was the security officer at the beginning of episode 1. There's even the same phrase repeated in the real world and in the dream world when the officer says, quote, "There's not much of a difference authority-wise." So that's kind of a connection there, loose connection. It all just made it seem very dreamlike, which, I mean, we know it's a dream, but it's cool to have these little things that kind of bring you out of it and feel like dreams that you've had. It's bordering on reality, but it's so absurd that it has to be a dream, if that makes sense. So anyway, in this dream, they're following a dying woman's last wish to go after a lemur that was stolen and brought into a fur shop to be turned into a hat. Right? The whole thing turns into this huge gunfight between the owners of the fur shop and the fish and wildlife officers, who are, for some reason, armed like they're a SWAT team. Somehow Emma Stone and Jonah Hill escape with the lemur and complete their mission to give it to this old woman's estranged daughter, only to find out that it wasn't a nice gift at all. It was basically just one last fuck you from the grave. And yeah, so there are a couple interesting points I wanted to touch on here. First, on their way to the first store, Emma Stone's looking at a bottle of the A pills, but in this reality or dream or whatever, she refers to them as antihistamines. She doesn't recognize them as the A pill that they took in the first part of the experiment. She calls it antihistamines, but it's clearly got the same shape. And she says, "I read somewhere that antihistamines are bad for you, that they stop your body from defending itself." Now, it's not hard to see the symbolism there, because that is literally what this whole process is. If you remember from the 3 pills, the ABC, first they identify your defense mechanisms, then they plan out a map of how to rewrite and overwrite these defense mechanisms, and then part 3 is replacing your defense mechanisms with something that allows you to overcome this pain. Now, at first I thought, because there's so many similarities, I thought this was Emma Stone's reality that was bleeding into the dream world. It was her book, her interaction with the officer. At the end, we saw the 18-wheeler speed by, and the estranged daughter mentioned the middle name Fun, F-U-N, just like the truck driver that ran her and her sister off the road. So it all felt very Emma Stone-oriented, but then you notice that there's this little Easter egg with Jonah Hill. While he's looking at his marriage counseling book, if you pause it, you can see a blurb at the end alluding to a relationship ending because of a blip. similar to what Jonah Hill actually experienced. It says, and this is an exact quote from the book because I paused and read it. It said, "Perhaps you had a schizophrenic break in college and screamed at a young woman you felt a soul connection to, and that moment has always haunted you and shamed you, and it informs every new relationship you try to begin, because what if the same thing happens again?" Which is a very specific and descriptive written word version of Jonah Hill's worst fear, right? By the way, I felt like a moron because I paused it and read the entire page, and then if you unpause it, literally 2 seconds later, it pans over and it zooms in on a caption below a picture of a young woman, and it says, Olivia Matthews, your emotional poltergeist, who you screamed at during your blip. So Jonah Hill's reality is very much bleeding through. I didn't need to pause and read that paragraph, but whatever. It was fun for me. I was like, ooh, I found a little secret, and then it wasn't really because they tell you right away. And obviously the picture, I think it's the first time we've seen her, the picture is of Olivia. But the one person who fully breaks from this dream world and realizes that maybe things aren't exactly right is Emma Stone, right? Because she tells this whole story about her mom being gone. And of course, that's from her real life because her parents are still married in the 80s dream world. And, Jonah Hill's really confused by this. But perhaps this is the result of her defense mechanisms not being fungible. Remember when they're doing the initial entry thing, she fails it because her defense mechanisms are not fungible. Jonah Hill's are. So this is her defense mechanisms basically overriding and, not cooperating with the point of this trial. She's basically fighting off the effects of this B pill by not fully buying into what she's seeing in front of her. She knows it's fake. Her defense mechanisms are kind of pushing back on that. But the 80s dream ultimately ends with Jonah Hill taking the blame and getting arrested for the whole lemur incident. And, that's it. Episode 5 seems to kick right up with a new dream sequence, except this one's not in the 1980s, this one's in the 1940s, and Emma Stone and Jonah Hill are playing grifters in this one. So right away we could see a similar pattern to the 80s, because their memories and little details are getting inserted into this. It almost reminded me of Inception. You saw that in Inception when little pieces of the reality were bleeding through into the dream, which obviously all happens in our real-life dream experiences too. You might recognize a face or a specific thing that happened to you that day might work its way into a dream when you go to sleep. So it all kind of makes sense. But just to name a few specifics, the ad buddy that originally rode the subway with Jonah Hill in the beginning of the show, he's now his, henchman or sidekick or whatever driving him to this fancy party. So right away, that guy makes an appearance. Honestly, the big difference to me between the 80s and the 40s world, and this could be a coincidence when I was watching it, it was that the 80s world seemed so geared to Emma Stone and the 40s world seemed so geared to Jonah Hill. It was more his fantasy. Because you also had Olivia at the party, right? Olivia makes an appearance at this party. Very much somebody introduced from Jonah Hill's world rather than Emma Stone's. But they're both in it again, right? It's a shared dream. Emma Stone, Jonah Hill, they're both in this 40s world. And actually, one more thing. The names were really interesting to me. So in Jonah Hill's dream, the name is Never Die. And obviously, Jonah Hill, one of his big things is that he had this failed suicide attempt, right? So to have the characters or the secret organization named the Never Dies, I thought that was obviously an allusion to Jonah Hill's reality. And then in Emma Stone's dream, she's delivering the lemur to the Naslins. Of course, Greg F.U.N. Naslin was the truck driver that killed her sister. So even the core cast of these dreams seem to be geared towards specifically Emma Stone or Jonah Hill, as if they're the dominant writers and then the other person's just sort of edging it out, adding details here and there, sprinkling it in, but the core writing is done by one dreamer, it would appear. But anyway, the biggest moment of this dream, the 1940s dream, is clearly the introduction of Gertie. We know Gertie as the supercomputer that's sort of navigating and creating all these dream sequences, but in this reality, she actually inserts a physical version of herself, played by Sally Field. And this whole thing proceeds with the understanding that Gertie, although she's a supercomputer, she's also very lonely, right? She's lonely. She keeps inserting herself into the storylines, which is something that's very atypical. That's not, I feel like Justin Theroux is very thrown by this. And as if that X Factor wasn't enough to deal with, you also have this Jonah Hill and Emma Stone crossover. They're stuck in this reality together. They keep going through all these dreams together. They're not supposed to. You're supposed to experience all these things as an individual. So you have the lab techs basically trying to separate those two characters from a dreams. They succeed, but then they keep getting stuck back together. Like they'll pull Emma Stone out for a second, and then she'll sort of zip and zap back into the Jonah Hill dream until eventually they separate her enough to pull her out of the dream state a little bit earlier than Jonah Hill. So, first of all, how are you guys doing? You following? Are you overwhelmed? It's a complicated show. Imagine, by the way, because we're getting to the end here, imagine if I did 3 episodes instead of just 2. I mean, I can't even. It was getting exhausting talking about, and I was like, all right, we better limit this thing. That's how I realized I should cut it off when I did. So, this is just episode 4 and 5. But they pull Emma Stone out early and put her through something called the proximity test, which, according to Justin Thoreau, is a cross-check of the data that we've gleaned to make sure that there was significant progress with the dissolution of the patient's defense mechanisms. Complicated, right? So basically, he asked her a series of questions about the dreams that she experienced, and she just has to answer honestly. So Justin Thoreau explains that these dreams are actually reflections, and there's actually hundreds of them going on at once, and they all seem to represent different parts of the dreamer's personality, not really just personality, but the personality surrounding this really painful memory, right? Because the whole point of these pills is to take these painful memories and delete them, or at least make you feel better about the way you handle them, right? So he asked Emma Stone, what do these two dreams mean to you? Because she said she remembers a bunch of them, but there's two that specifically stick out, obviously the two that we watched. So in the 80s dream, Emma Stone recognized the woman in the dream as Paula Naslund, the mother of Greg Naslund, the truck driver. Apparently, Emma Stone used to imagine what would happen if Greg was never born, thus never running her and her sister off the road. So we basically saw an envisioning of that, a way that her defense mechanism of sort of making herself feel better or rewriting history or whatever was for her to imagine that this truck driver was never born at all. And that's what we saw. We saw this lemur incident, which is supposed to be a big FU, and it was supposed to basically say lemurs are better than children, so don't have children. It's some weird, fantastical, absurd dream scenario, but the ultimate message here is that Paula Naslund never should have had kids in the first place. In the 40s dream, we saw a part of Emma Stone's personality that would make deals with people and charm people in order to get what they wanted without a single concern for who she hurt along the way. And this apparently is a trait that her mom had that she sees in herself, and she hates that she sees it in herself. So this is another deep, painful memory for her. We don't get any explanations on how Jonah Hill's issues factored into these two dreams, at least, not at this point in the show. But I think we can make educated guesses. So in the 80s world, he's working hard on repairing a broken relationship with Emma Stone. In the back of his head, he's afraid that he's going to have a blip. That's why he sort of manifests that and reads that in the book that he's reading in the dream. He's worried he's going to mess it all up again and that he's not good enough for her. And all the insecurities that he had with Olivia, he's now experiencing that with his dream wife, Emma Stone. In the 40s fantasy, he's playing this rogue agent that doesn't have time for a partner, and having a partner complicates things, and that sort of manifests itself with Olivia, who's in the dream, and with the Emma Stone character. But either way, he's this loner, and it's better to be a loner because it's more simple, and this has led to a lot of the loneliness and the sadness that Jonah Hill experiences. So that's why he's manifesting that in this dream. It's really, really sad. I mean, this shows the perfect blend of very funny and very sad at the same time, and, I think that's what makes it so great. But we'll wrap it up there. That's episode 4. Episode 5, hopefully I didn't overwhelm you too much. I'm going to try to make it simple and really dumb it down, not in an insulting way, because anyone watching the show probably understands it on some intellectual level, but I'm going to try to dumb it down just so this is even consumable as a podcast, because this is a complicated show. You thought Westworld was complicated. I think this is actually more complicated, not in narrative, but in themes and things like that. But I love it. So I hope you guys are enjoying it too. Once again, you can find us at thedisorderly.com. That's for the best in sports and entertainment, all the articles, this podcast, everything's up there. On Facebook, Disorderly ENT. You can find us on Twitter at Disorderly Media. My name is Nick Rizner. You can find me on Twitter at Nick Rizner, NickRizner. DMs are open. Please give us any feedback, criticism, anything like that. Pass this along. Tell people about this podcast. It's a passion project, so any word of mouth really helps. And there you go. Hope you guys enjoy the rest of your week. I will catch you next week with part 3. This has been the Maniac Companion Podcast presented by The Disorderly. Take care, guys.